Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to a cultivating and enlightening session on arbitration and alternative dispute resolution mechanism hosted by Asian Law College. It is my honor to welcome our guest speaker today, Justice Bashir Ahmed Khan, former Chief Justice, Jammu and Kashmir High Court. Justice Bashir Ahmed Khan was born in 1945. He enrolled as an advocate by the Bar Council at Delhi in 1971 and shifted to Srinagar Bar in 1972. He has worked as a lecturer in Kashmir University Law Faculty during 1972 to 1978. He has practiced both civil and criminal sides. Sir was appointed as an additional Advocate General in September 1986 and he resigned from the post in 1990. He was appointed as permanent judge and Chief Justice of Jammu and Kashmir High Court on 12 November 1990. From there, Sir shifted to Madhya Pradesh High Court on 8 October 1997 and headed its Indore bench as administrative judge for over 2 years. Sir was appointed at Delhi High Court on 14 Jan 2020 and was transferred to J&K High Court with effect from 11 October 2005. We welcome you, sir, to Asian Law College.
Thank you, ma'am.
We also have amongst us Mr. Dhaval Kumar Singh, Assistant Professor at Asian Law College, who shall share some knowledge on the topic set for today's discussion. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Garima ma'am. I hope that everybody is audible. I'm audible to everybody. Okay.
Yes. Sir.
Now, I first would like to thank Justice B.A. Khan, who has, agreed to grace this day by his presence and illuminate us as to the problems existing, in the arbitration mechanism. Now, when we discuss about arbitration and conciliation, we know that arbitration and conciliation, which is at present dealt by the 1996 Act, that is the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. It's, the mechanism is rooted deep in our cultural wisdom, okay, wherein we saw that earlier we had a mechanism of getting our local disputes or a dispute resolved by the Panch Parmeshwaras, isn't it? Now, this is also not only not only rooted in our cultural wisdom, but I would say that it is also a mark of our continuous march towards a more civil society, towards the establishment of a more civil society, resolving our dispute amicably instead of a call to war. Okay. Now, but it would be foolish for us to think that only these ideals have, helped us out to adopt these ADR, okay, or alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. We know that, in fact, the genesis of this or how it involved was to, take into account or to consider the needs of the trading communities, people who were, involved in the commercial activities. Of course, they needed a dispute redressal system which, being outside the formal legal system, was devoid of the complexities that the formal legal system had. By formal legal system, I mean the court litigation. Okay. Now, of course, ADR and arbitration as mechanism belonging to alternative dispute resolution, it is having these advantages. It's very simple. Okay, devoid of the technical complexities. For example, it's the procedural laws, they don't apply to the Arbitration Conciliation Act 1996, okay, etc., etc. Now, so therefore, what forced us, or in fact, if I would, if not forced us, what, allowed us to consider or helped us to take into account ADRs or arbitration was the need of the time. Because we already know, and this had been highlighted by several law commission reports, that the formal legal system, if I would say it, was heavily burdened with the pending number of cases, okay? And therefore, we needed certain systems whereby access to justice can be provided to the litigating parties or to the parties to the dispute, okay, and therefore the dispute can be resolved amicably. Now, the 1996 Act, it was based on was inspired from the ancestral model law, okay, and it replaced the 1940 Arbitration Act. And though the Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996 in itself is a remarkable development over its predecessor law on the subject, but still the objectives that it desired to achieve, whether it has achieved or not, whether it has been able to achieve those objectives or not, that is still a question mark. That is still a question mark. Now, the key mantra in this act was maximum party autonomy and minimum court interference. But practical experience tells us otherwise, that this has not been, totally incorporated and ingrained in the workings of the 1996 Arbitration and Conciliation Act. Okay. Now, the act was framed with the objective to provide a speedy redressal system, a simple procedure devoid of technicalities, which is cost effective and which is binding on the parties. But we have seen that it is not free of hiccups and uncertainties, and this is because there were too much court interventions. Of course, they were necessitated. Okay, there were too much court interventions, and differing interpretations given by the court also created too much, if I would say, anomalies, as well as conflicting, it somehow conflicted with the provisions, the literal meaning that the provisions were trying to give us. Now, a classic, if I would like to quote, a classic example being the Bharti International case and the Balco case judgment, which was given thereafter. Now, the Balco case, even though it redeemed many of the problems that were caused by the Bharti International versus bulk trading case, but still, it itself gave rise to certain unforeseen consequences, because of which afterwards we saw that still, because of that judgment, there were certain problems. Okay. Now, to overcome all of this, there were certain or several amendments made in the act. The most important being the 2015 Amendment Act and the recently made 2019 Amendment Act. But the story is far from over. And this we have seen in the BCCI versus Kochi Cricket Limited case, and thereafter the judgment that has been delivered by the Supreme Court in Hindustan Construction Company Limited versus Union of India, and another case, wherein Section 87 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, which was inserted by the 2019 Amendment Act, was struck down by the Supreme Court of India as being arbitrary, okay, and contrary to the objectives of the Amendment Act. Now, when we talk about the Arbitration and Conciliation Act or the arbitration, we also cannot but take into account the global developments that are taking place. And one of the key developments that has taken place in this regard is the coming into force of the UN Convention on International Settlement Agreement resulting from mediation. Now, how this affects our domestic law on the subject, it's still to be seen whether this will again be incorporated by way of another amendment, or now the Parliament will realize that we need a different act altogether. Of course, I would say that there are certain missed opportunities also. For example, still after so many amendments, we see that one of the fundamental problems may be the definition of international commercial arbitration given in the 1996 Act, that itself, because it does not make a reference to the subject matter of the dispute. It's only restricted to nationality of the parties, and whether it has been done deliberately or it has been, and there is a rationale behind this move, or there is, this is just, a case of ignorance or overlooking of the Parliament, So with this, what I think is that, and my concluding remarks will be that Arbitration and Conciliation Act is anything but simple. It was meant to be devoid of technicalities, but I think Sir Justice B.A. Khan can only tell us that how technical the law has become. And you need to constantly keep a tab and understand the workings of the provisions, because the provision may say X, but you will find that the judicial interpretation on that given provision, it says why, and the authority on law is not what the provision says, it is what the judgment says. So of course it has it's anything but simple. It has become highly complex and needs a very in-depth and understanding of the legal working of the act, how the act is working. Okay, although the object of both the act and the judicial pronouncements being the same, to achieve the same, that is the objective of the act, that is maximum party autonomy and minimum court interference. But this again, we see that in order to achieve this also, the judgments that have been given or the steps that have been taken in the form of amendments made by the parliament, they have also created problems in the working of that. So with these, I give over the platform back to Professor Garima Malhotra, and hope that Justice B.A. Khan sir would illuminate us from his experience, valuable experience, insight, and understanding of Arbitration and Conciliation Act 1996. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Thavil sir, for setting up this space and energizing our students much more. I'm sure that they're way more inquisitive now to know more about the details of the topic. With due permission of you, Justice P.A. Khan sir, can we please begin with the question and answer round, because students have sent us a lot of questions and they're inquisitive to know.
Oh, you are subjecting me to an interview, huh? Most welcome.
Sure. So the first question, thank you so much, sir. So the first question is, Sir Abraham Lincoln said, discourage litigation, persuade your neighbor to compromise wherever you can. Point out to them how a nominal winner is often a loser in fees, expense, and waste of time. So can we attribute this quote to arbitration?
No, Garima, not in my view. This has been, in fact, something which I have been myself practicing in the court all the time, and rising about technicalities and the letters of law. But the way things are working and the way arbitration has been made an extension of the litigation, it's an extension of the lawsuit, where one doesn't find any difference. There's nothing speedy about it. There's nothing ever inexpensive about it. So I would not be able to say that what Lincoln said would apply to arbitration. It may apply to partly, where in cases where there is a proper approach and where there is a sincerity of purpose, where all stakeholders deem it their duty to end the dispute, to resolve the dispute, and adopt constructive approaches and attitudes. In that case, yes, Lincoln's might apply. But the way it's going on today, I don't think even Gandhiji had said that please resolve it at your place. But who does it? In case of commercial litigation, it's again not possible. It's not again not possible. Why? Because stakes are high, because everybody wants to make a buck, from arbitrator to a counsel to a party. Everybody wants that he should make a buck out of it. Now, if that is the attitude, it leads to dragging on the disputes, it leads to delays, it leads to court interference at every stage. And ultimate result is that, in my view, we have not made a very substantial difference between the litigation in a court and an arbitration before an arbitrator. If you want me to go into that, I have 100 reasons to say so, because I have gone through both mills. I know what is what. And as was expected. Now, let me give a little background. See, arbitration, when we enacted 1996 Act, the first object was to relieve the burden of the court system. That time also we had some 3 crores of cases pending in the subordinate courts. We had some 45 to 50 lakh cases pending in the high courts. We had a lakh of cases pending in the Supreme Court. So that time a lot of thought went to it, and we struggled for adopting some kind of an this alternate dispute resolution. And this arbitration came our way because Unistal model had by then become. So 96 Act was adopted with the purpose, with the intention that we will relieve our court system and divert the dispute accumulation to another mechanism or method, which is called arbitration. And that's how came the 1996 Act. And 1996 Act, if you see Section 5, it says that no court will interfere unless it is provided in the Act. But can you believe me? There is court interference at every inch. Every inch would be before the arbitration starts. Before the arbitration starts, you have Section 9. And an interested party resorts to that Section 9 and goes for an interim order before a civil court, and that civil court treats that proceeding as a civil suit, and it drags on, pleadings take years to be completed, and arbitration has yet to start. Now, after the arbitration starts, then you have court interferences in mode of appointment of arbitrator. Now, when arbitrator starts working, then you whatever order he may pass, and if the party wants to delay the whole thing, the party approaches the court against even in an interim order of the arbitrator, not to speak of an interim award or a final. For example, if an arbitrator closes the evidence, which is an interim order, which he is competent to do, a party will rush to the court. Now, see the attitude here. If those who are managing the courts, judges, if they had any good understanding of why arbitration was chosen as an alternate resolution method, they would not interfere, but they welcome. The moment you go to the court, even if you got in a writ petition to the court, challenging a closure of evidence order, there are people sitting who will say issue notice, and once they issue notice, it takes years in summoning and this and that. So the purpose is lost. Now I'm giving you this background out of experience because on both sides I have seen it. If you have a judge with the right attitude sitting in the court, he will not entertain. He will say dismissed. He will say go back to the arbitrator. He will say let arbitrator decide it. But if you have a judge sitting with an attitude that no, I must also have my finger in the pie, then he'll say issue notice and then file this and then file that, then file that, then file decessor, and it goes on. And the arbitration is not completed at all. When this problem arose, then a thought was again given, and we had amendments in the Arbitration Act, as the professor was saying. But those implicit, there is something which is on paper and something which is on implementation. So by amendments, for example, 2015 amendment that prescribed a 1-year period of limitation for completing an arbitration proceeding. And that 1 year plus if the parties seek an extension. Now, even that got defeated. Why? Because suppose you have lawyers appearing before an arbitrator, they are interested in delaying, having as many meetings, adjournments as possible. For arbitrator, those who are lousy, lazy, lethargic arbitrators, it also suits them. So they go on, carry on like that. So even by prescribing a time limitation in the law, we have not been able to adhere to those limitations. And with the result that arbitration continues to be a duplication of the civil suit. And if that is the position, then I'm sorry to say that it has not served the purpose for which it was resorted to. But I'm not saying that I'm not a prophet of doom saying, oh, nothing is working at all. No, we have made certain strides only in those cases. See, it all depends on a human resource, the human element which is working out. Even your court system. You have a judge who gives nothing but dates, tariq pe tariq, tariq pe tariq. And there is a judge who resolves the dispute on the spot, instantaneously. So it all depends on how you work out the system. If your human element is such that it is traditionally conditioned or bound by the court system delays or the laws delays, he reflects those in the arbitration proceedings also. So it's another matter. I'll come to that if somebody asks me that why are there former judges only mostly being appointed as arbitrators, and they are tradition bound, or they may carry their practices to the arbitration. That's a different matter altogether. But to answer your question, in my view, what Lincoln has said or what Gandhi may have said may not apply to arbitration wholly unless you have a sincerity of purpose. And by that sincerity of purpose, you resolve a dispute, which you can do in the court also. When 1996 Act was being enacted, and when we started implementing it, I have said on so many platforms that same thing could be done by us in the court. You know about the Lok Adalat tamashas which are being held. No, why can't that Adalat be held in your own court? With the right attitude, we have section 10 in the Civil Procedure Code, which provides for hearing the parties and knowing the dispute. In our court system, nobody bothers to go by that provision and tries to know the dispute. So that much for your Lincoln court, and the rest you can proceed now.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So we have a student with us, Vikrant Sharma, who has a question to put across. Vikrant, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good evening, sir.
Good evening.
So my question is to sir, sir, what is the difference between court litigation and arbitration?
That's a classroom question, which in fact should be answered because my audience is only students, you know. See, Grant, I don't want to take you the theory of social contract and how the nation state came into being. But, you know, when a society is to be regulated, it's to be regulated by the state. And now try to understand, I'm giving you the simplest between. Now, what does state do? State regulates a society's, hello? Relates to society's activity. Are you getting me, or there is a disruption?
Yes, sir. Sir, you're audible.
No, the student I was talking. Okay, he must have been off the screen. Yeah. Now, for that regulation, state makes laws and provides forums. Now, those laws give rise to rights. Those laws give rights to disputes. Now, for resolution of disputes, state provides a system which is called court system. Now that system is manned by people called judges. Now those judges are appointees of the state. You can take in your this thing not technical that state is a government, let us say. Now they are appointees of the state. They are paid by the state. Now, their job is what? Their job is if a member of the society goes with a dispute to this court or judge, his job is to resolve it. And his job is to resolve it, but that resolution of the dispute does not satisfy both parties at all. Now, when you go with a claim to the court and the proceeding which ensues, that is called a litigation. Am I clear or any? I have been a teacher also, so I'm hammering it more to the student. Now, when you go with a claim of right to a court and it ensues a proceeding, it is called litigation. And the person who goes to the court and against whom he goes to the court, they are called litigants. Now, in this court system, there are certain problems. For example, this court system has to follow a specific prescribed procedure. Just as you might have a civil procedure code, maybe ma'am is teaching you that. Now, a court can't depart from that procedure, prescribed procedure. Similarly, it is said that court is a very expensive business. It is expensive because the law profession has commercialized. It has ceased to be a professional or that missionary thing which is used to be in old times. Now, the lawyer's fee, the court fee, the delays, the patience, the hearings, and all that accumulates the expenses. Now, it is said that this litigation has become expensive. Then comes the delay. Delay comes that a person does not see the result of this litigation even after third generation. If you, for example, file a suit for recovery of, I have dealt with a suit for recovery of rupees 3,000, which was launched 60 years back. And that suit was running on a preliminary objection for 40 years. And preliminary objection was that this claim of recovery is not within limitation prescribed by the Limitation Act. And whether this 3,000 was recoverable or not, no court, no judge was going into that. Now, those are the law's delays. Those are the judicial delays. Those are the films you say, Tariq pe Tariq, Tariq pe Tariq, Tariq pe Tariq. And Tariq pe Tariq has become a norm in our court system. So considering all these, that we want something speedy, we don't want any delay, we want something inexpensive, we want something informal, the answer was arbitration. Now, what is arbitration? Arbitration is also a dispute resolution mechanism proceeding. It is a sister proceeding of the litigation, in which difference being two parties agree to appoint a third person or third persons as arbitrator or arbitrators to resolve their dispute and bind themselves with what this third person's decision would be. Now, distinguishing features, not bound by any procedure. This proceeding is not bound by any procedure prescribed like CPC, like or a procedure given in some law. It's not bound by that. Why it is not bound? Because it's said to be an informal proceeding. In this informal proceeding, parties are given the liberty to choose their own procedure, or if they fail, arbitrator may adopt a procedure. Now, rules of evidence do not apply to it. For example, you go on filing list of witnesses and those witnesses may be summoned or may not be summoned, so on and so forth. So it was thought that rules of evidence should not apply to it. And if arbitrator wants some evidence, he can call for that evidence in the shape of affidavits and in one go. Otherwise, if you see in court cases, taking of evidence, depositions takes years and years now. Now, expensive. It was thought that no court fee is to be paid, no lawyers may be required because two parties are reconciling their dispute. So it will become very expensive. So in arbitration, distinguishing features supposedly were that it is an inexpensive method of resolution of a dispute. It is a speedy method of resolution of a dispute. it is not leading to further litigation by way of appeals and so on and so forth. So that is the distinction between an arbitration and litigation. Now it's a different debate altogether. Whether arbitration has turned out to be that or not, in my view, not. For example, it is no longer speedy because it takes as much time with the court interference as a civil suit would take. It is not inexpensive because lawyers again appear there and charge the same fee which they charge in the court, though they do it after the court hours. So it's not, so arbitrator also charges his own fee. You will see the slab of fee fixed in cases runs into a few lakhs per hearing. So it has ceased to be inexpensive as it was expected to be. And that's the difference between litigation and this arbitration. Any more questions?
Thank you, sir. So the next question is power to grant interim relief under Section 9 rendering arbitration as vexatious proceeding?
I agree completely and endorse it. As I said it in the very first instance, this Section 9 is the most misused provision in the Arbitration Act. Just as you have 498 in the criminal code. See, again, question of attitudes by the human element, by the judges. This Section 9 application is filed in a court, civil court. Civil court treats it as a suit. And when civil court treats it as a suit, it goes through the same procedure of filing of pleadings and coming of evidence and documents and this and this and this and that. And it takes years and years. And if it is a Section 9 application before the arbitration is started, then arbitration doesn't take off at all. Now, keeping all this in view, certain restrictions have now been imposed, but those are not being implemented. For example, this Section 9 application should be disposed of in 1 year. Who does it? And in this Section 9 application, if the judge refuses you the relief, then you go in appeal against that. And matters reach to the Supreme Court. I remember addressing an arbitration conference before the Supreme Court judges telling them that you are contributing to this delay and you have defeated the provisions of the Arbitration Act. Now, if an order is taken on Section 9 application of refusing a relief or granting a relief is taken to the Supreme Court, imagine in the hierarchy, imagine the time consumed, imagine the money involved. Now, there is also a restriction that once the arbitration has started, after this, if the interim order is granted to you under Section 9, then arbitration must be started within 3 months. And thereafter, it is left to the arbitration to continue with that interim order or to modify it or to pass a new order. So Section 9, in my view, it doesn't serve any purpose. What are you trying to protect? Protect is you are trying to secure something which you think may go away by the time an arbitrator is appointed. There should be provision for that. I'm not saying there should not be a provision for that. But then it has to be a summary proceeding. You can't be treating as a civil suit and continue for years on. Hello, am I on the screen?
Yes, sir, you're there.
Actually, you are going off. I don't know. You must be doing something anyway. So that is the answer to the Section 9 of the Arbitration Act, that it is more misused than genuinely used to secure the purpose for which this was enacted. And this is not my case that Section 9 provision should not be there. But my problem is, my complaint is the way it is being worked out is frustrating the whole purpose of the Arbitration Act.
Thank you, sir. Next question will be put across by Sebukta Nasreen Hussain. She's a student with us. Sebukta.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, ma'am.
I'm Shebukta Nasreen Hussain. Hope you and your family members are safe and doing well. So my question...
Reciprocate the sentiment. Delhi is very bad. You are in Noida?
No, sir, I'm in Assam.
No, you are from Assam. Assam is election over?
Yeah, sir, election is over.
Now it will be taken over by pandemic, huh?
Yeah, sir.
Okay.
So my question to you is, you have served in both the capacity as a judge of High Court as well as Chief Justice of High Court. Please tell us the change in role and responsibility when you were discharging duty as a judge and when you were discharging duty as a Chief Justice of High Court.
I think that should be known to all law students, to you also, that a judge only confines to his judicial work. His job is only to consider, hear, and dispose of cases which are being listed before him. He has no other further responsibility. The whole thing may go to dogs, or the department may go helter-skelter. He has nothing to do with it. He is only concerned with dealing with the cases, hearing cases in his court which are listed before him. But Chief Justice is the head of the court in a state, court system in a state. He has so many onerous administrative responsibilities other than being a judicially working judge. So he judicially works as much as the judge works. He is in the court from 10 to 4. And he is also reading files and writing decisions up to late in the night. But in addition, even if he has to wake up midnight, then he has to cater to the administrative problems of the judiciary in the state. And those are many, and those are of different types and different shapes. For example, he has to supervise, monitor the functioning of the courts in the state. Now, what mechanism he adopts? Now, he has to, for example, consider the suitability of transfers of the judicial officers in the state. He has to look after the expenditure and budget of the High Court. He has to be the face of the High Court. He has to hire and fire whatever, in case of any this thing happens that things are not working smoothly. He is the administrative head. Now, all those responsibilities take much of his time in addition to his judicial duties. So it's a very burdensome being a Chief Justice. But that is the difference between judge is not, judge is relaxing, he is doing his judicial work and then making merry, or if he wants to. But Chief Justice is all the time dealing with the problem, and he is the face of the judiciary in the state. And then he has to also take care of what's happening in Supreme Court and how he is coordinating with the Supreme Court. And he has to coordinate with the government also for putting up the infrastructure, for example. You have to have court buildings, you have to have staff increase, you have to have this. Then he has to coordinate all this with the government. So all these things make Chief Justice different from a judge, and he is overburdened in a way. And Chief Justice of India is all the more because he has to deal with internationally and nationally and judicially also. So Chief Justice also fixes his rosters. This roster, master of roster problem which you are debating these days. He allots cases to the judges of the High Court, and that allotment proceeds on certain say criteria which he may have adopted himself. It can be a random allotment also. But when it comes to a selective allotment of cases, that raises a problem, as we have been seeing in the Supreme Court in the last few years. In fact, one Chief Justice, that Deepak Mishra, who was working with me in Madhya Pradesh, an impeachment motion was brought against him only for this, for selective allotment of cases in a roster. So now today we have a problem of whether a Chief Justice should be a master of roster or not. Or should there be any guideline or criteria on the basis of which he allots a case to a judge? If he does it subjectively according to his likes and dislikes, that makes it a problem. And that problem we are facing today. And I think that debate is going to be raised. But I don't think that debate will ultimately end up anything, because you have no option otherwise also than to give Chief Justice this power of allotment of cases and being a master of roster. Now, if you include, for example, like collegium, if he includes 2-3 judges more in this allotment business, then it's going to be chaotic. There'll be chaos. Every member will say, no, don't send it to this judge, don't send it to that judge. So you will not have a smooth working that way. So that is the difference between the judge and the Chief Justice, and which every law student must know.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, ma'am. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is, the party's intention to go for arbitration plays a very vital role. How do we gather the intention of parties in a given set of facts and circumstances?
No, ma'am, that depends on what is before you. That before a court, before a, see, for example, communications between the parties. If you don't have an agreement in writing, now it's prescribed to be in writing. So this is almost a fictional issue now. Now arbitration agreement has to be in writing. Now, but wherever it is not in writing, then the intention has to be gathered. Now, how do you gather that intention? Depends on a number of circumstances. The record before you, for example, the correspondence between the parties and so on and so forth. Like we gather an intention in a criminal case, whether he intended to kill or did not intend to kill. So that gathering process depends on the nature of the record which is produced before a court, whether parties intended to go for arbitration or not. But I think that issue has not much importance now.
Great, thank you, sir. Kamaljeet Singh is with us, a student at ALC. He has a question to ask. Yes.
Good evening, sir. This is Kamaljeet Singh, student of LLB batch 2020 here at ALC. So my question to you, sir. So when we critically evaluate the entire process of arbitration, it has been introduced to resolve the dispute amicably and at a faster pace. But ultimately, various sittings of arbitration adds on to the cost of litigation, and then the awards, if challenged in a court, it goes through cumbersome court procedures. So, sir, how can we make it more effective and efficient?
That is the problem. And that is, we find no answer to it. Why don't we find an answer to it? Because again, the human element is not working to the purpose. Now, why human element is not working to that purpose is again because of the interests involved. Now, in simpler terms, you are a student, let me tell you, suppose tomorrow you become a lawyer and you happen to be appearing in an arbitration case. Subjectively, on personal level, you would want more hearings to be there or not? Who asked for an adjournment? Who asked for Tariq for Tariq? Who asked for that? And who grants it? Now, I have seen lawyers appearing before me and telling me, my lord, this is a personal difficulty is the buzzword in court functioning in Delhi. My lord, I have a personal difficulty. Now, a lawyer who has charged 4 lakhs of rupees for appearance comes to the court and says, I have a personal difficulty. And the client doesn't know. The client thinks that he's arguing, he's fighting my battle there. And I remember asking a very top lawyer one day, what's your personal problem, sir? He said, I have to go to a dentist. I said, how much you have charged? He said, I can't disclose here, sir. I said, why can't you go to the dentist in the evening and attend to this matter? He said, no, sir, the dentist has given me appointment after 2 only, at 2 only. Now, this is what's happening. Now, when you from outsider says, so many meetings are taking place, it suits arbitrator also because he is charging a fee for the meeting. Now, as a lawyer, if you ask for an adjournment and as an arbitrator, if I grant it, we both benefit out of it. And parties also do not object because you as a lawyer is asking for an adjournment at the instance of the party. That party wants to delay. Now, if arbitrator was conscientious, he would not grant it, but he has again a problem of his fee. So where are we taking this? We are taking this to the same level of civil litigation. So I agree, there are meetings, the meeting after meetings, I agree there are delays. But that is, you can't help so long as you improve the human element, you reform the human element, for which I see a very little chance because of the commercialization which goes around.
Thank you, sir, for your
Thank
answer.
you.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is, has arbitration evolved as duplicate litigation?
Yeah, ma'am, 100%. 100%. It's an extension, it's a duplication, it's an extension. That's what I'm saying. That's why I cry horse on this. What it was conceived to be was an alternate dispute redressal system out of the court system and away from the ailments of the court system. But that has not happened. And we carry it as a duplicate courts. And whatever is bacha khacha jo bhi hai, that is satisfied or fulfilled by the court interference at every stage.
Right, right. Next question is from Sangeeta Birla.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Sangeeta. Where from?
I'm from Haryana, sir.
Haryana, okay.
Sir, I would like to ask a question to you. Sir, is the lack of administrative power to enforce the award is resulting in inefficiency of arbitration?
My answer would be yes. Because enforcement of the awards is a big problem, huge problem, which results in delay, which results in defeating the purpose of arbitration, which makes it as, should I use the word, unspeedy or prolonging or lethargic as it could be in the litigation. Now that enforcement power, I don't know whether it could be given to an arbitrator, just as civil court has the power to execute its own decree. But that's a matter for the parliament to decide, and I leave it to parliamentary wisdom, where 90% of the members do not know what law they are enacting. So, if arbitrator is given the power to enforce his award, I think that things can improve. Because enforcement takes years and years. You know how enforcement takes place? Do you know how enforcement takes place? I'm asking you, ma'am, do you know how enforcement takes place?
Yes, sir, when we meet
Huh?
So when we need it, then enforcement takes.
No, enforcement of award.
No, sir, I don't have any idea.
Okay, that if you have another question for that, then we can go on that enforcement of award. Otherwise, I leave it here by answering that if arbitrator is given the power of enforcement, maybe things improve. Whether he should be given that power or not, that is not for me to say, that is for Parliament to decide.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is, what is the difference between setting aside an award and appeal?
Setting aside and award and appeal. Ma'am, in arbitration, there is no appeal as such, except under section 37, which is for 2-3 purposes. For example, if a relief is refused to you under section 9, and you are not granted an interim order or interim relief, or if you are granted, both ways you can appeal under section 37 to the court. But against award, there is no appeal.
Okay, sir.
Against,
Right.
no,
Right, please.
I have not started even on this. What is setting?
Yeah, sir. So please.
Are you in a hurry? Then we can close.
Definitely not, sir. Definitely not.
Okay. Now, the only option open under the Arbitration Act is to file an application under section 34 for setting aside of the award. Right? Now, that application is limited to certain grounds. An appeal, you must know, is a reopening of the whole business, whole suit. An application of setting aside is confined to certain grounds only. Now, what are those grounds? Should I give you those? Or the difference is that in appeal, the appellate court can review overall. And in application for setting aside under section 34, the consideration and hearing has to be limited on the grounds provided under the Act. Now, if you make out any ground in your application, then that award gets set aside. Now, what are those grounds? For example, award is against public policy. Second, for example, an award breaches substantive provision of a law. Third, award is against morality. Fourth, award is against the interests of India. Award is outside the scope of agreement. Now, these are grounds on which an award can be set aside. And in that application, you have to make out the ground which is prescribed in the Act. You have to make out that ground. If you make out that ground, inquiry scope is limited to that only. Now, how is it different from appeal? In appeal, you do what? I'm asking, in appeal, you do what?
So to be very honest, I'm not a law faculty. That is why I'm unable to answer it back to you.
Oh my God, you are which faculty then? Oh, I am addressing a wrong person.
I am training personality. I'm training students for their personality
development. Okay. Now you are only passing on the questions to me.
Yes, sir. So these are students' questions only, and I'm moderating this on behalf.
So the answer is that appeal is rehearing of the whole matter, record, evidence, everything. And application for setting aside is limited to the grounds prescribed under the Act. And why it's a different matter, how that application is treated by the courts, which again results in delay.
Right. So we have a student with us, Rishu Ranjan.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I am Rishu Ranjan. My question is, sir, as we know, arbitrators are appointed with the consent of parties and then the proceeding comments and final award is pronounced. In the entire transaction, what is the role of a legal professional and how the legal professional helps the arbitrator to deliver an appropriate award?
Same as in court, legal professional assists a court by what?
Sir,
By,
how legal
that's why I am answering that only.
Sir, how legal professional helps in the arbitrator to deliver an appropriate award?
My answer is just as he helps in the court. How does he help in the court? Tomorrow, if you become a lawyer, how will you help the court? You will assist
Why
the
help?
court. You
Yes,
will
sir.
assist the court, no? By
Yes, sir.
giving the nuances of a case, by giving the facts of the case,
Yes,
by
sir.
helping in the evidence, cross-examination, examination in chief, by taking through documents, by taking out the relevant law from Google, and then present it to the court, that is assisting the court. So a court may not know everything about the case. It is that lawyer who helps the court or the arbitrator in going into the examining the case and giving it a proper consideration, which results in a just award or a just decision. So that is how. What did I say? What did I say?
So you said, as a lawyer, we give evidence, facts through the parties, what the party said to me, and we present in front of the court. And with the help of arbitrator, we disclose the fact that parties gave and the arbitrator and we disclose the fact in front of the judge, and he delivered the justice.
Okay. Next question, ma'am. Next question.
Yes, sir. Sir, the party's intention, no. Okay, can a non-signatory to arbitration be impleaded at a later on stage in the arbitration proceedings?
No, normally not, because the basics of an arbitration is that it's an agreement between two parties and only those two parties can be before the arbitrator seeking arbitration. Third party is not. But there are situations in cases where courts have allowed a third party also. For example, in the case of multiple agreements between parties involving lots of people, various people. Now, in such a situation, one of the party to that agreement may come and show that I am a necessary party to the dispute which is being arbitrated. Now, in such circumstances, court may allow. But ordinarily, a third party is not admitted to arbitration because arbitration is a dispute resolution between two parties to the agreement.
Okay, great. I would request our student Prashant Pandey to put across his question, please.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Myself, Prashant Pandey of BALB, and my question is, the 2019 amendment aimed at institutionalizing the arbitration in India. Please throw some light on the scope of institutional arbitration in India.
Mr. Pandey?
Ji. Yes, sir.
There are two types of arbitrations. One is ad hoc arbitration. The other is institutional arbitration. Ad hoc arbitration is, which is very much in vogue in present day times. That is, when two parties make an agreement appointing an arbitrator and also agree on the rules of procedure to be applied, the fee to be paid, and other attendant problems, the venue to be organized, and so on and so forth. That is called ad hoc arbitration. It may be an arbitrator appointed by the parties or appointed by the court. The other type is organizational institutional arbitration. Institutional arbitration is that there are organizations which arrange for that arbitration, whose business is only conducting arbitration. Just as you have Indian Council of Arbitration, FICCI is in Indian Council of Arbitration. Just you have Arbitration Center in Delhi High Court. Just you have Bombay Center of Arbitration. You have Palkiwala Center of Arbitration. International level, we have Singapore Arbitration Center, Hong Kong Arbitration Center. Now, these are institutions which conduct arbitration. Conduct arbitration means what? Conduct of arbitration means they have their own panel of arbitrators. They have their own rules how the arbitration should be conducted. They have their own fixation of fee. They have their own modes of award passing. In those institutions, the arbitration proceeding is regulated by the institution. It's not regulated by anything. Now that's called institutional arbitration. In institutional arbitration, we are lagging behind. We have, I think, 330 or so many centers here, but people are not enthusiastically going to that. But at the international level, there is a trend which is going for institutional arbitration only, but that institutional arbitration must be of the international standard, which we do not have presently here. In our country, I think the Bombay Arbitration Center is working well. The other arbitration centers are not attracting any work because arbitration has turned ad hoc. In that also interests of all stakeholders are involved. For example, fixation of fee. In an institutional arbitration, fee is fixed by that organization. For example, Indian Council of Arbitration fixes the fee what an arbitrator has to pay. For that, it has its own rules. That for a particular amount, how much fee should be fixed. Now that institution or organization doesn't pay the fee immediately. It pays the fee after the award is passed. So it is better in that arbitrator also remains very punctual. Lawyer also remains punctual because they get the money only after the arbitration is complete. As against ad hoc arbitration, where in every meeting you have to pay the fee to the lawyer also, to the arbitrator also. So that way, institutional arbitration is preferred by the commercial arbitration people on disputes at the international level. Did you get the difference between institutional arbitration and ad hoc arbitration?
Prashant, did you get the answer? Could you understand?
Ma'am, I didn't audible. Sir is didn't audible.
Okay, probably.
All that has gone waste.
By
All that has gone waste. You should have said it first in time. All that what I said gone waste.
No, in between your voice is breaking, sir. That's why. Nothing else.
Up to what point you heard it?
Ad hoc arbitration, you said, na, ad hoc arbitration parties negotiate and settle fees with the arbitrators directly. Till that part I listened.
Okay. And what is institutional? You didn't hear a word about institutional. Next question, please.
Sure, sir. The Supreme Court has laid down the test to judge whether a particular dispute is arbitrable or not. Request you to please throw some light on the same.
Well, arbitral dispute has its own, there are varying views on that, but broadly it is, for example, a difference of approach or opinion does not make it an arbitrary dispute. The dispute must arise out of the agreement entered a contract, for example, out of the parties, and that dispute must be contestable. If it is not contestable, for example, a dispute may be admitted. A contractor's bill is there, and out of the bill, say it's for 10 lakhs, and 10 lakhs he has already say received. So the dispute ends there. Now, if this contractor goes with a claim to for arbitration, it will be found that there is no arbitrable dispute on which an arbitrator can arbitrate. So, but that is a little academic, and on that there are varying opinions. It depends on the facts and circumstances of a case, whether a dispute is an arbitrable dispute or not. Next question.
Thank you, sir. I would request Preeti Madhu, a student of Law College, to please put across a question.
Yes. Greetings, sir. I am Preeti, a first year law student. Sir, I'm from Hyderabad, and so my question to you is, sir, amendment. Hyderabad, sir.
Hyderabad.
Yes, sir, Hyderabad.
Okay.
Okay. Sir, amendment in 2021 has added a provision wherein if court, if prima facie feels satisfied, can stay the award unconditionally to the disposal of the challenge. So, sir, can this be used by the parties to use for the delay of enforcement of the award?
My answer is yes. My answer is yes. You know, yeah, making a provision for automatic stay in a case which is alleged to be induced by fraud or corruption makes it a routine thing. Now, for example, you file an objection to the award and allege, without any supporting documents, that this arbitration or the award was induced by some kind of a corruption or some kind of a fraud, I have to automatically give the stay. And when I give the stay, it suits one party, because that party has not to deposit the award amount. For example, successful party has gone through the arbitration and he is expecting to receive the award amount, but the other party takes an objection. No, this award or the proceeding was vitiated by fraud and so on and so forth. And court has no choice but to automatically grant this stay. Now, when court automatically grants this stay against the award becomes dead. Now, it suits that party. For example, if that party had to pay 10 crores to the successful party, he sits happy at home and then adopts a strategy to delay. And you have a corruption in court system also. And he manages the file to be shelved or a case to be listed at the last number, which may not be taken up. So it will result in delay. I don't find any rationale for such a thing, because otherwise also, when a court or an arbitrator has to grant a stay, he considers prima facie the material before him, and on that prima facie consideration, a stay is granted or is not granted, which is subject to be heard, subject to the objections and subject to the vacation by the other side. But in this case, it is not so. It has to continue till award till the objection to the award is finalized. The award to the objection is finalized when? It may take its own time, though there is a time limitation now, that objection, but who does it? No court does it. So it will definitely result in delay in the practical working. So let it come to implementation. So there will be a delay. Yeah. You have gone off the screen, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for your answer, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. So the addition of 10 years experience as an advocate, engineer, chartered accountant, company secretary, etc. by 2019 amendment under the qualification of arbitrator, can we say it will restrict the opportunity to choose the arbitrator from parties' perspective?
Who has given you this question?
Sir, our dean has given this question. Some of the students have sent it across.
Now the dean must know that this has been deleted.
Okay.
In 2021, the schedule which was attached to the Arbitration Act has been deleted in 2021 amendment. So now, as for now, there is no requirement of an arbitrator to be qualified under this or that or that or that. Now that has been left to the arbitration council will be set up under the amendment of 2021. And that arbitration council has to scrutinize the credentials in a panel of arbitrators and then has also to fix up the qualifications that that council wants to be. That council is to be headed, it has not come into force so far. That council is to be headed by a Chief Justice of the former Chief Justice of the High Court or the Supreme Court. So there is no longer any restriction on the qualification of an arbitration. So parties are free to choose the arbitrator of their choice.
Okay, thank you, sir. So we have one last question from our student, Babita Rawat. Babita, you can put your question across.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Babita. Yes.
Sir, arbitration as a field has a lot of career option. Would request you to kindly share some with us from your experience in the field.
Oh, it's a gold mine. I concentrate on this. But it is same as it is career prospects which any other lawyer may have in the court. It gives you, but further, you have to specialize in different types of laws which are come into play in an arbitration proceeding. More so commercial laws in commercial arbitration. I believe that there is no limit to your any professional doing well or finding, so long as you have the requisite dedication and you put in the requisite hard work. Now, it's same for a lawyer. You are a lawyer, you may go to the court or you may go to the arbitration. Now, arbitration field gives you a different experience and it may give you more money also. But for that, you have to know all those types of laws which come into the, but in that, if you expect that from there you will become a judge or chief justice, that is not perhaps. You may become a company executive, someone, that's a different matter. Or carry on with the arbitration practice. Beyond that, I don't see much in the progression of the professional growth. It's just specializing in a particular branch, as you do, for example, in a court system, you do in intellectual property, or you specialize in criminal law only, or you specialize in civil only, or tax only. Similarly, you specialize in arbitration. It gives a wider choice to go for.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Dhaval sir, over to you.
Over to me.
Sir, Dhaval sir, yeah.
What I was supposed to do now? Now I thank you very much first, and then all those who have participated in this meeting, and I kept it strictly at the level of my audience because I thought that students must get some idea of what this all is about. I don't know how far I have succeeded, but my style of finding the feedback has not worked well. So I hope that whatever I have said and whatever you may have heard make some understanding and some about the subject we were discussing. But be that as it may, I am not an examiner. I was subjected to an interview by you. I hope I have qualified or passed or no.
Sir, it
You
was
have
really a very
you have
interesting
excelled,
session.
and
Yes.
I would like to just give certain comments on behalf of Asian Law College and its students and faculties as well. First of all, sir, I cannot thank you enough for the illuminative session that you had and we had, in fact, with you. Now, I would also like to thank you for, answering the questions of the students so patiently. And in fact, which I also noticed, even though some of the questions were, very theoretical and which, in fact, made you comment also and made me laugh that they are intended to be asked in the class, but still you patiently, entertained all the students and went on length to, bring out the difference between arbitration and litigation, which I think in academics, we begin that subject with this. What is the difference between litigation and arbitration? But you went on to the, social contract theories, means what is the objective of the formation of a state? And then, because that is, of course, directly relevant, the judiciary also being part of the state. And thereby, it has a primary role of resolving the disputes, because that is how if I go by the wordings of the Supreme Court, that is how the faith of the common man in the judicial institutions that is maintained. So of course that is its primary objective. But of course when we see that the proactive role the judiciary has indulged in, and its focus on access to justice, and of course the need to find innovative solutions to give redressal to the grievances of the disputing parties. So of course we have, as I earlier also said in my remarks, we have resorted to alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. But again, one of the things, in fact, I don't know, but one of the things that I basically learned from what you told us, and which is a very crucial point we often miss out when we are discussing Arbitration and Conciliation Act, which in fact we never discuss, and that is the human element involved. It's and it basically brings me back to, if I would trespass into another jurisdiction subject wise, and that of jurisprudence, which I'm reminded of what the realist scholars say, is jurists who belong, or scholars who belong to the school of realism, that in fact it is, the law is nothing but you can get to know the law if you know the judge. Means it's the approach of the judge that matters, which you rightly brought out to us, that some of the judges will simply take up the matter and resolve it. Okay, some of the judges may have a very orthodox manner, in the sense our judiciary is ingrained, whereby they treat the same as a civil suit, and then of course when it is treated as a civil suit, comes with it all the procedural laws and the procedures that are involved. And the consequence is that you don't find any difference between arbitration as a dispute resolution mechanism and the traditional court litigation mechanism. So of course I think I have not even come across articles also whereby enough research has been done on this topic. And I think this is a very valuable key point input that has been given to us. For me as a legal scholar and professor of law, as well as to my students, we can endeavor to find out, in fact, it may be that one of the reasons why arbitration is not being successful is because of this problem, this attitude.
And even when court system is failing.
Yes,
even
sir?
Even court system is failing on this.
Yes, even the court systems. Yes, in fact, I remember that when the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was holding a meeting, or a conference, he rightly pointed it out that the judicial attitude also has to change, because and in fact, I remember when I was a student, it was rightly pointed out by Justice Karchu himself, who said that the Supreme Court judges have a tendency to intervene in every matter. Means even if you see petitions coming for running a school, or matters like this, which should not be interfered with and should not be taken up, because the judiciary also has limited time and resources to cater to. Means but then so sir, thank you very much for bringing out this crucial point to to our notice. And then of course, last but not the least, one of our students, as they are of course rightly concerned, she hit the bullseye by asking you that what is the career option, or how lucrative is arbitration? Because we of course know by by seeing the practice of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act that arbitration is not an inexpensive mechanism of dispute resolution now. Far more than that, nothing can be more true, that instead of being, and this is especially true of international commercial arbitrations, where we see the lawyers as well, they now being more interested in international commercial arbitrations because of the amount that they can gain as part of rendering their services, means getting the fees for rendering their services. So that is also, but you rightly said that whether it's arbitration or litigation, as lawyers, what we will require is the development of the primary skill that involves an expertise of law, and arbitration comes secondary. Means of course it's you have to be aware of the arbitral provisions of the law on the point, but then you have to be, for example, IPR. So if we have we have the subject matter expertise on IPR, then we can build on our expertise on arbitration, and we can take up the arbitration cases. So very thank you for that also, sir. And I think that the way you handled the question and the way you have illuminated us, it has been a very fruitful interaction for all of us right here. So with these words, I will once again thank you on behalf of my students, myself, and Asian Law College, and would now hand over the platform to Professor Garima, ma'am. Thank you.
So I think being thankful would be a small word. We are genuinely very, very honored to have you today among us. So honestly, students who are here with us live, they have been sending constant messages, and one of which, the recent one, reads that this had been indeed the most influential session and such a great renowned jurist with us today. So thank you, sir, on behalf of our students who are truly enlightened. And on behalf of the management, I would like to present a memento to you as an acknowledgement of your association with Asian Law College.
How do I receive that? How do I receive that?
Sir, right now virtually, and then we're going to send it to you offline as well.
This is a digital mazak. Huh?
Sir, indeed, we shall be sending the same to you. And once again, we look forward to a continued association with you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Garima. It has been a pleasure interacting with these students. But what I would suggest is that please ask your organizers to get their feedback. If they don't give on their own, those who have participated, they must be asked to give it. That will show you whether there is any purpose in holding these webinars or not.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much.